Si alguno quiere venir en pos de mí, debe negarse a sí mismo y tomar su cruz y seguirme. Porque quien quiera salvar su alma la perderá, pero quien pierda su alma por mí la encontrará. Pues ¿de qué le servirá al hombre ganar el mundo entero si pierde su alma? ¿Qué podrá dar el hombre a cambio de su alma? Porque el Hijo del Hombre vendrá en la gloria de su Padre con sus ángeles y entonces pagará a cada uno de acuerdo a su conducta. No es un Dios de muertos, sino de vivos. Buscad primero su reino y su justicia. Amarás a Dios con todo tu corazón, con toda tu alma y con toda tu mente. Glorifiquen a vuestro Padre del cielo. Para Dios todo es posible.
As far as just directing the film, it's probably about the hardest gig I've ever done in my life. And it wasn't as big as Braveheart with all the horses and people and stuff, but there were more precise things that had to happen in it. Every sequence was definitely difficult to get, and difficult to get the way you wanted to get it so that you really experienced it, so you felt like you were in the middle of it.
The actors and everybody on the film was being motivated to put everything that they had, you know, and their best work on the screen.
He's wonderful with the actors. The greatest experience was to get to see him working with the actors because he's so good at drawing out of them, because being an actor himself, he was really great at knowing how to deal with them to get what he needed in terms of a performance.
You know, but stand up first, like a rabbit that got shot. You ever seen that?
They trust him. I think it's about trust. A lot of actors resist directors because they're probably better actors than the directors are. In Mel's case, you know, he's at least on par with any of them, I dare say.
Mr. Gibson knows exactly what he wants, but in the same time he's an actor, and a wonderful actor, and he loves and he respects actors. He asked us, he pushed us to express ourselves, to be creative.
He doesn't talk a lot, Mel. He's more, he moves a lot. It's like if he want to tell you how to do things more with his body, the way how he moves, than the way how he talks. There is this thing that's almost animal about him, and instinctive, which is very interesting.
When he's directing and he's watching the video monitor, and he'll be doing the action. He'll be even saying the lines sometimes, and the facial expressions, and he'll move it back and forth. And you almost want to sit him down and tie him to the chair because it gets distracting. You know, he's moving and he's making noise while he's doing it too. So sound guys are going crazy, and he really gets sucked right into the moment, as if he's part of that whole scene that he's directing. And it's unique. I've never really seen anyone do that.
I was lucky to have Steve McAvey there, who was like, the guy's amazing. He doesn't know how to quit, you know. Sometimes I want to slap him. I said, why don't you just quit? You know, but he doesn't know how to quit. He's really dogged. So he was really good to have there. He's always a good guy. And a lateral thinker as well. If you're banging your head up against a wall, he'll say, hey, why don't you just walk around the wall? And you go, oh, no, thanks, Steve. I hadn't thought of that, you know. I mean, he just thinks in an oblique way that's kind of, it just didn't occur to you because you're too focused on what you're doing. So he's able to sort of like pull you up and go, hey, you know. Great. He was a really valuable asset, really put himself out there, gave everything he had. The guy lost 50 pounds during production. He was like a walking skeleton by the end of it, but he was like a ball of energy. He was just going on hard.
I got an idea. Why don't we let me out now?
Nobody understands me. I need a translator. Oh, you were. Oh.
di non andare dietro a Jim se no se...
Local energy, now we have these signs. Do you see these signs?
Vedete questi cartelli che abbiamo qua giù, che abbiamo fatto?
All right. Okay, do that one.
Fate questo, va demonio, fate demonio!
Hey, funny thing happened to me on the way to the warfare.
I mean, you're working in another country with people who speak another language, and you have that step. You're missing that step of communication, instant communication. You got to depend on interpreters and stuff like that. So it's kind of frustrating. Everything takes a little longer.
Don't use the same gestures all the
E
time.
non fate lo stesso gesto così continuo.
No repetitive gestures. Use different gestures.
Fate gesti diversi.
And then sometimes it was not worthwhile trying to even explain what you really meant. You had to do something simpler that would approximate that. Some things are too intangible almost to grasp. So you just say, okay, everybody, think happy thoughts, or, you know, whatever it is that you can juxtapose against something else to emotionally get the right kind of level.
You're all looking here.
State tutti guardando verso di qua.
34, 35, 36, 37, 38.
I think it was more my problem than anything else. I mean, people on the continent over there are used to somebody next to them speaking another language, so they've developed some kind of other sense that understands. And in many cases, I would be saying something in English, and they would just look at the translator and go, no, I get it. And not knowing English, but they get it. I must have been doing something, communicating in some other way, or they're just more attuned in Europe to be able to understand someone without necessarily understanding all the verbiage. I wanted the light quality of it to be really dynamic and beautiful, pretty much like a Caravaggio painting, you know. And he can do that. We had a world lit only by fire. He certainly gave that older sort of just fire-lit look to anything at night. Of course, we had a little help from electrics, but hopefully no one noticed.
You know, we always sort of jokingly said never has so much light been used to create so much darkness, but, you know, on film you're really creating your own reality. I mean, it's more an emotional reality than it is, you know, a naturalistic reality.
There is a sort of combination of these blues and golds, you know, for blue moonlight, and it's cliched in a way, and yet it really was appropriate, and trying to find the sort of appropriate slate blues that we really liked, you know, to sort of represent the moonlight. And then intermixing that with the fire creates a sort of a wonderful aura about a lot of the scenes.
I love playing with speeds and juxtaposing one speed against another. I love playing with speed when it's imperceptible. I would say that very few shots in this entire film were shot at regular film speed, that is 24 frames per second. Even the normal stuff I was shooting at 28 or 30 frames per second, all of it like that, because I wanted every aspect of it to be lyrical and graceful. It just smooths everything out and makes the women prettier and the guys more profound, you know. It just has a gravity to it. And it was right for the pacing of this because it was more like a painting. It was stiller, although it moved, and it was fluid, and it was otherworldly.
Guys, we're doing a rehearsal. That means we don't want a lot of stuff on. Here we go. And action. Down. All right, never mind. Cut. Okay, that's good. That's good.
You obviously feel a certain responsibility because you're feeling, you know, you're telling a story that means so much to so many people that you really want to get it right. But in the end, you know, I felt guided by the same things I'm guided by in every movie, which is the dramatic structure of the story and the drama that's going on, and creating visuals that would help, you know, to amplify that particular dramatic part of the story.
When we were doing the raising of the cross, we had a technicrane there so that we could stay with it and stay with the point of view of Jesus going up on the cross and you know, get the angles that we needed so that, you know, we would not you know, have to step back and lose the emotion of and immediacy of what was going on.
Head forward, Jim. Head forward, Jim. Falsius! Lift your head forward, Jim. Falsius!
And, you know, there's a lot of technical aspects to it, but in the end, you know, what really drives you is some kind of subconscious, you know, inspiration that gets you to those compositions and those feelings that they express.
He'd love to see you. Come whenever you like. I mean, there are other people, but you're on the list. Come early if you like. It's no problem.
Shyla Rubin, she's amazing. I mean, she must be the first lady of casting in Europe, you know. She's based in Rome. She went there as a young woman from New Jersey. She could offer me this smorgasbord of talent. And I tell you what, some of her suggestions for, like, get this person, get that person, they're spot on. She knew where Maya Morgenstern was. I'd never heard of her. She said, you know, there's a woman in Romania who may have, and then she showed me another film she was in, and the film started off with a close-up of her, a big close-up, and I thought, that's her, get her down here immediately. And she was indeed perfect. I mean, I wanted her to experience the suffering herself with a certain sense of acceptance, you know, to be grief-stricken, but not to let it overwhelm her dignity. I didn't want her breaking down and, like, bawling and screaming and stuff, because most people would do that. I wanted her to have almost a mystical connection or understanding with what was going on, with that knowledge, so that she could actually bear it, although it was unbearable. To get someone to do that convincingly, you needed an actress who was very soulful, and of course Maya is an extremely soulful person, and extremely sweet and kind, and, you know, and capable of doing wondrous things. And it wasn't much, but it was enough. You know, whatever she was doing was amazing. And she was with child at the time. She didn't tell us that. So she had this other kind of glow going on. I didn't figure that out till, like, about halfway through the shoot. I saw her waddling up to the set, and I said, hey. And she went, I'm busted, right? Yeah, I said, yeah. So.
Do they call Francesco, so they call him Frank here?
No, they call him
Ciccio, yes, nickname, because I come from south of Italy. And in south of Italy, Francesco is Ciccio or Chicco. That's because you use the south end of the name, right?
When Francesco De Vito came in the room, you know, he played Peter. I mean, it was instant. The guy was just perfect. He had sort of childlike innocence, and he looked kind of rough and busted up, and, you know, it was just perfect. So you knew instantly, you know. He didn't even have to talk. I got excited, you know.
I mean, the great thing about doing the film in Aramaic and Latin from the point of view of casting is that Mel could cast anybody from anywhere. You didn't have to have someone who spoke English. Maya Morgenstern comes from Romania, and the guy who played Pilot comes from Bulgaria. And, you know, there are a lot of actors, obviously, from Italy and from North Africa and everywhere.
You know, within 10 or 15 minutes just talking about the weather, you get a sense of someone, what they're capable of. The only thing I did have to know was whether or not they could pronounce some of this Aramaic stuff.
Okay. And say إماك ورانين تريل وشرنا بناء هيكلة. تا هاك.
نحن باين يشوى من سارق.
أنا هو. The Christ figure is usually portrayed as some little kind of scrawny guy, and Jim isn't that. He's masculine and big, and that was very important for me.
Mel pulling out a picture of one of the gossip magazines, I'm not sure, but it was a little image of this actor named Jim Caviezel, and I don't know who he was, quite frankly, but I'd heard his name, but he said, you know, this is the only American I think that could actually play this role of Jesus.
Oddly enough, a man came to me about 6 months before Mel Gibson did and said, you know, I think you'll be playing Jesus. I said, well, that's kind of an odd statement. And he says, yeah, well. And then 6 months went by, and I got a phone call that Steve McAvity, who is Mel Gibson's producing partner, wanted to meet with me on a movie called Mavericks. So I went to the meeting, and we spoke for a while, and then Mel Gibson showed up. And the interview kind of turned direction. We started talking about faith, and as he brought it up, I said, I just felt this need to say to him, because all of a sudden, what I heard 6 months prior to this, all of a sudden I remembered that, and I said, you want me to play Jesus, don't you? And he says, well, yeah. And I said, okay.
He was perfect. I mean, he came tailor-made to do this. He was able to put aside any of his personal kind of wants and just be, which is all it was required, really. It's just be in this situation. And it was, I don't know, he pulled it off. I mean, that's one of the hardest things to do. And I defy anybody else to try that. There's another aspect of him that's just otherworldly or inspired or higher. Sometimes you'd forget about everything and just get zoned right in onto what he was doing. It'd be really interesting. And it wouldn't be necessarily the way you visualized it, but you'd get something else, but it wasn't bad. It was like, wow, I never thought of that, you know? And, you know, you talk with him about it between takes, and then he'd go and do it again. He wasn't trying anything. It just happened, you know? And that effortlessness and ease with which he just let that happen was, I think, boy, you don't often see that. There's not a performance like it. That's got to look real, and it does. To me, it's pretty horrendous. Not that we sort of focus too much on too many gory things, although, you know, you get the message. But where it has to be quite real, it is. And the special effects are nothing short of brilliant. I've never seen anything quite like them. You don't know that they're special effects. That's how good they are. You don't know.
Jim is not just Jim Caviezel in this movie. There's no one thing that has Jim just being him. He either has a wig, he always has a nose prosthetic on that we apply every single day. I had a total of 9 different stages to Jim Caviezel's makeup, from start to finish, from Last Supper to Pieta. We had to have a technique that the actor could be mobile in, could work in, and most importantly, a makeup application that we could do in a timely fashion. If we have an actor in facial prosthetics, full body prosthetics covering every inch of his flesh, a beard, a wig, dentures, you start to add up all these elements and you start to add up time. And when you're doing that 25 days in a row, you can't have 8 and 10 hour makeups. You'll never sleep. We ended up developing a technique based off of a temporary tattoo idea. It's a 3-dimensional prosthetic that is transferred to the skin via water. And these prosthetics are attached to giant sheets of paper. And we had this special chair that we'd constructed for Jim. And that way we could get around his entire body. We could get the front, the back, behind the legs, the front of the legs, around the arms. And we were able to take these giant sheets of prosthetics that were attached to paper, stick them on his body, wet it with water, and then peel off the paper, and all these pieces were attached to his body. And it cut the process down of what would normally we kind of guesstimated would have been an 8-hour makeup down to about a 2-hour makeup. There were moments when, just for whatever reason that day, the weather wasn't in our favor. He'd be in this entire makeup after the finished process, and we were unable to shoot. So rather than remove him out of the makeup, he would go home and sleep in his makeup. Literally just his body torn up looking, and his face all, you know, scraped, and his eyes swollen, and sure enough, the next day he would come in, everything would be great, and we'd start our day. Those nights were really nice because we actually got more than 2 hours sleep, so that was good.
We got this guy, Tony Bertorelli, on the set one day, and he came in late in the picture because he replaced another actor who had to leave. And He was just walking down to the set, smoking a cigarette in his Pharisee outfit, you know, a cup of coffee, cigarette. He's walking down the set, and he bumped into Jim in the parking lot in his full getup, and it stopped him. And he had dropped his coffee and everything, and he was just stunned into a complete, like, stupefied state.
And we had to show that. We had to make it sympathetic. I think one of the biggest struggles was trying to make this makeup as real as possible, and at the same time make sure that there was still a human element, something that the audience could connect to.
As much as we knew about the makeup effects techniques that create realistic skin qualities, it still wasn't enough. I approached Steve McAvity and said, what if we take visual effects and combine the two?
You know, you put the lesions or the scarification on, and it would be pretty livid. And, you know, the guy wouldn't actually have a flagellum sort of ripping the guy's flesh off or anything. He would just kind of fake it. And we'd have to cover up the wound with computer-generated skin. And then as the flagellum would come through, you'd actually reveal the wound that was already on him. So it was kind of like the reverse of what most people would have done.
Yeah, you feel a little bit too far away right now.
Too far? How's that?
Yeah, that I believe.
Is that good? You can control it pretty good. I'm not really giving it too hard, like when I'm selling it.
Yeah.
The actors were always just holding this much of a whip. Never even came close to him with the leather straps or the talons that were on the end. We brought back the actual props and made playback loops of the chosen takes so that he could see what he was doing. Then here in front of a green screen, we had a puppeteer in various, sometimes almost comical positions to try to get himself out of the shot, puppeteering what the actors were doing. It also gave us real lighting, real gravity. The tines interacted with each other. None of that has to be programmed or specifically animated. And at the end of the day, we've got 7 or 8 elements for 7 or 8 shots done. Whereas if we tried to do that with CG, we would have been at it for weeks.
This is for the Caifa. For the Pharisees, yeah. This is like the Caifa thing.
Yes.
What do you think, man? Too much or?
Maurizio Milanotti, I mean, please. He's worked on like 5 films for Icon, and he just gets better every time. And he was already good to start with. Beautiful costumes, you know, luxurious fabrics, and it had a sense of reality to it. One had the idea from looking at his costumes that they were all made by hand and that they were rough-hewn and worn, and that people didn't have a whole bunch of suits. They had a couple maybe, and you know, they were aged, and it just looked very gritty and very real. I loved his costumes. They really made it.
Un mix di questi colori qua.
And the beards that they played, they didn't look like phony Bible bad wigs and all this kind of stuff. Either people had their real hair, or they had very good wigs and beards, and they were applied by people that really knew what they were doing. I think Jim had his beard applied in pieces and layers, like with hair. That's kind of like doing a haircut in reverse. That's almost impossible. That's like shoving a toothpaste back in a tube, you know? And it looked real.
the cross was a star. It was the star of the movie. It was as important as Mary Magdalene or Mary, or in terms of a character, and it had to be right.
And of course, training the back, because the cross was so heavy. You could have made it lighter, but it wouldn't have looked real. It wasn't as heavy as a 300-pound cross, but it was at least half that weight. So physically, I did, just a lot of back exercises and weights to make my stamina strong.
That's all you need. I mean, like, this is good. That's amazing through here, Steve. It's just amazing. You can see. Remember the hair. His hair. It'll work. We'll make it work. We'll dig a hole if we have to. Flex.
We had to drive nails into Jim's hand on camera, and of course that had to be a special effect. You can't drive a nail into somebody's hand.
My initial reaction was, don't try to shoot anything on set, just have, his hand stretched out like this, just turn his hand down into the cross and use the ropes as the blend line between what is shot on set and what we could shoot back here, knowing that when we got back here, we reversed the setup. Instead of having the hand turned down into the cross, we had a hand coming up from underneath the cross. So all we've got is a hand on the cross beam against green screen that we could pound the nail into. We had the background plate shot in Rome of Jim's hand turned on the cross. Then we have a green screen of the hand. Then we have a green screen of the nail and the Roman executioner's hand. And hopefully it seems like it blends right in with the movie.
You cook up in your imagination, and then you have to go around and find out how to execute them, because the answer isn't always easy for some of these things, I mean, how do you get Jim on the cross, nail him to it, flip him on his face, then flip him back over, and so he lands on his back, and without killing him? You've got to find ways to do it. It was important to have a substitute that looked exactly like him, and we actually had an effigy of Jim with mechanical lungs. And it would breathe, and it would move its head sometimes. He's an old French priest, He came to watch the shooting one day, and he was watching Jim up there on the cross breathing and moving his head around. And then the guy with the batteries and the machine and stuff, he sort of had to go and take care of something, so he put it down, and it got switched off, and Jim didn't move all of a sudden. He stopped breathing. After a while, the old padre sort of went up, and he was a little worried about Jim, because Jim hadn't breathed for a while, and by golly, he stopped moving his head, and by goodness, he looked like he was dead. He started going, Jim, please, somebody. The dummy was so convincing that the padre thought Jim had died up there. And we told him, it's just a dummy, look, and we showed him the switches, and he was breathing, and this guy started to, laugh that he'd actually fallen for that. That shows you the quality of the workmanship that these animatronic dummy guys can do. I mean, it's like, wow. It's indistinguishable from the real thing.
On the cross, I had to stay in a position for 8-9 minutes while they had all the 3 cameras rolling, and I literally put all my weight into one leg and keep it in a squat position while the left leg hung over it. And what I did in that was I did a lot of lunges and squats, and I literally just would get into a squat position on a wall and hold for 5-10 minutes at a time and do sets of these to build up my quads to be able to do this. Prayer was such an important part of getting ready for this film because of the grueling hours of makeup from 2 in the morning till 10 and not being able to sleep because of all the makeup. I don't know if you've ever experienced a sunburn at all, but you know, when you go through that healing stage of itching, sometimes I had to wear the makeup on at night. And so I never really slept properly, and the nonstop of headaches because I couldn't see out one of my eyes, and the thorns were in so tight on your head that you had a migraine headache all the time.
Jim was absolutely amazing with the process and the procedure. I can only imagine what he must have gone through.
And we might have to give you some verbal indication of hitting Jim like I'll say swing, dig, pull. All right, something like that. Swing, dig, pull.
Okay, let's try. Let's shoot.
One day, we were doing the flagellation scene, and one of the Roman guards struck and missed and hit my back on accident. I couldn't even breathe. The wind got knocked out of me. The pain was so horrific. I thought, okay, that won't happen again. And we went on, and he missed, and I ripped my hands out of the chains, ripped them out, and screamed. And I had this huge welt mark that, I mean, full-on scourge right on my back. And basically they took that and said, oh, okay, well, let's just match this, and they based it off that scourge. But every stage of the way, one day I was carrying the cross, and I was supposed to fall, and the Roman guard was supposed to catch the cross. He missed it, and the thing just crushed my head like a melon. Blood coming out of my mouth. Part of it is the fake blood, but part of it's the real blood, because it took like a month to heal. It was like someone held off and punched you, and your teeth just cut up against your gums. Anytime that someone went by and hit you, hit the cross, it separated your shoulder, and you just was, you know, I'd stop and, you know, scream. One of the shots, I remember going down some stairs and someone hit it, and I was screaming to heaven. It hurt so bad.
There were so many days that we were shooting the Golgotha scene where he's up on the cross. This is when he's being crucified. And there would be winds of 40 miles an hour. Everybody's in jackets or parkas or trying to keep warm, trying to keep the sand out of their eyes. And here's Jim in a loincloth, covered in blood, and he's up on this cross 15 feet in the air, and the cross is blowing back and forth. And there's definitely moments when you're looking up there and you're just, you have your head in your hands.
The gas heaters to keep you warm had gas coming out of it, and I was very sick from them. I couldn't keep anything down while I was on the cross.
Jim? Oh, he suffered up there. He really suffered. I mean, it was freezing out there. He was up on this thing. His arm was like, he had trouble with a bad shoulder. It was all ripped out. And he never complained much. Every now and then he says, oh man, can you guys hurry up? You know, poor guy.
I'm so full of antibiotics right now. I've been sick as hell. I was about 200 yards away from Mel Gibson, who was in a tent, and began to rain. And you'd hear the thunder rolling. It got really quiet. It was like a eerie silence, and I knew it. I said, I'm going to get struck by lightning. And sure enough, I felt as though somebody took their hands and slapped them against my ears, and I saw what appeared to me was like a pink static color for about 7-8 seconds. But the moment it hit, I heard people scream, and a couple guys before me grabbed the ground. And what they saw was like fire coming out of the right and left side of my head. And I looked like I went to see Don King's hairstylist.
He confessed that it was pretty frustrating, but he never blew it. He never lost his patience, you know. I never saw him lose his patience one time. And that in itself is a miracle, because I would have been flying off the walls.
How many guys get to play Jesus Christ? I mean, this has just been a blessing. You know, Mel Gibson and playing this role. That I'm a kid from Mount Vernon, Washington, that grew up not even dreaming of being an actor, that becomes an actor and is led and gets to play his son, our Lord's son. I'm okay.
Yeah, Dad.
By using Aramaic and Latin, and some would have liked us also have used Greek, but we didn't, it brings people, instead of bringing Jesus forward in time, it brings us backward in time, and we are like flies on the wall to the Jesus event.
Foucault, a professor of antiquity and ancient language, a Jesuit, very intelligent, a Bible scholar, devoted 40 years to the study of the scriptures and the Talmud and the Quran, everything. He sort of looked at all these ancient books of the three big religions, and he's just an expert. So he was a major asset and a major resource for me when I'd ask him about theological questions or aspects of the film, like, what does that mean exactly? And he'd be able to sort of like go into that for me a little bit.
Jesus did, as a matter of fact, speak Aramaic. And the Aramaic we used, I take the blame, is not perfect. But it's about as close as we could come to what we know Jesus said and what the disciples said. So it does have a really sacred sort of quality to it.
Probably the language that was officially spoken at that time was classical Greek. And Latin was spoken, and Aramaic was spoken, and probably Hebrew too. But I just decided to go with those two languages because it achieved what I wanted it to achieve, which was more focus and less reliance on the spoken word. And you'd have to use your eyeballs on the visuals and the sound of it, which is really nice.
We really don't know what first century Aramaic sounds like. Sometimes I just didn't know what the Aramaic word was for something. So I would have to look around in either later Aramaic or into Hebrew, even into Arabic, and then Aramaize it, change the pronunciation to fit the Aramaic. We were able to end up with plausible Aramaic. This is language that Jesus could well have spoken, but it's sometimes it's calculated guess. And we also had Pilate address Jesus in Aramaic. He was there for 10 or 11 years, and as a good administrator, he would have known the local language. But we also did it for a theological and artistic purpose, as have Pilate address Jesus in Aramaic. And we had then Jesus answer Pilate in Latin to throw Pilate off. And I think most people who have seen that section of the film understand that Jesus is beating Pilate at his own game.
Kant meleke kudaje.
Attenitipso hoktichis. Admorogasquia ali siktikserunt tibi deme.
Training the actors to work with the Aramaic lines was a complicated process. As I reproduced the script, I gave first the line as it was in English. Then I gave it in phonetic Aramaic. But underneath each syllable of the Aramaic, I gave the exact meaning of the line. For example, here I have prayed that your faith should not fail you. Al-Hasir lehawe Shima'on, not fail you, Simon. But the actual meaning is not failing be, Simon. And it was necessary for the actors to know with each syllable and each word exactly what they were saying, so their emphasis would be Aramaic emphasis and not English emphasis.
It's not
Ma, ba, minni, ba, minni.
Ma ba'ach minni. And I must say that Mel Gibson was very patient. If I would say, Mel, that doesn't sound right, it wouldn't be said that way. The emphasis is wrong. He'd say, all right, correct it. And so sometimes we do many takes just to make sure that the Aramaic was accurate. There's a line that I remember well because it was so hard to say, and it is one of the key lines of the film in terms of theology. Jesus turns to Mary during the way of the cross and he says, behold, I make all things new. It's kula chachadesh. And I can't tell you how we suffered over that line. I'm overwhelmed by the film. I'm proud to have had any part in it at all. And when I hear some of the lines from Jim Caviezel, well, all the major actors, indeed, it sends us, I'm very thrilled. I'm very thrilled to hear it.
Mel and I had never met. We only had this 2 conversations on the phone. And I remember when I got there and I got a ride over to the Chunichita, and Mel walked in the room and he looked at me. He He says, it's funny, I sort of expected a short, bald guy. The first scene they shot was the scene with Judas when he hangs himself. And since Mel and I have never worked together, I thought it was really important, I'm sure Mel felt the same way, that I should get him into the cutting room to have him see something as soon as I had something together. And luckily for me, the Judas scene, it just fell together. And I showed it to Mel, and he was very happy. And I sort of continued doing that through the shooting. I mean, about every, I don't know if it was a week or 2 weeks, but I would get Mel up to the cutting room, and he'd come up usually at the end of the day or sometimes during lunch. And I'd run things for him. We'd talk about him, and if I was off base, he'd say, I kind of had this in mind, that in mind, and kind of went that way all the way through shooting.
The editor was there, and he was busy, so you could check in on what you had, and at least a rough cut, get a general idea of what was forming, and that was, they gave you a lot of hope because it was working.
When I was putting it together the first time, there was no plan on having subtitles, or at least it was up in the air, And so I tried to cut it together thinking that no one's going to understand what these people are saying, so the visuals have to tell them almost everything, like a silent movie.
Well, it had to be, speak volumes with an image.
Rebeliones uprimebam inac stazione remota undicim annos. Si hunc condemnabo, sciu Caiafam, seditionem initiaturum esse. Si ita condemnabo. Discipuli eius initiabunt, uter libet sanguis effunditor. Caesar me monuit, Claudia. Bis monuit. Vice proxima. Ipse iuravit sanguis erit meus, eces mea veritas.
There's scenes in it that you really need to know what they're talking about. It's like the politics of Pilate and everything. There's no way you can convey that without the subtitles.
I had not originally planned to put subtitles in the film, but I tried it, and I just found that it was better. And I thought, because you're almost forced to read the written word, it's like interesting exercise.
The script was two-sided, and one side was in English, and one that was the same things in Arabic, and it was phonetically sounded out. It's the only way I could tell what people were saying. But it took me a lot longer to put this together the first time because of that.
It took the editor about 5 weeks or 6 weeks after we came back to finish his first cut, which is unusual, but it was a difficult project.
And then when we finally ran it, we had no subtitles. We just ran it, with the Aramaic. And I didn't quite know, I was sort of, at that moment, I knew more about the film than anybody, And I thought it worked pretty well, but, you don't know.
Basically, they had just taken all this massive amount of footage that they had and distilled it down into, a rough form of what the script was. And it is the most amazing first cut of a movie I've ever seen.
It went really well. It went really well. Every screening that I was at, when this movie's over, no one talks. It happens every time. There is like a total silence for, I don't know, it seems like an eternity, but it's probably maybe 2 or 3 minutes,
And it is one of the most emotionally charged experiences I've ever had watching a movie. It was absolutely amazing. I have no shame in saying it made me cry at least 6 times watching the movie.
You can't look at this without being moved, and that's how I feel. It moves me. It moves me. I found myself one time after, in the cutting room. I don't think it was in a theater in one of the screens. It was in a cutting room, and we were pretty close to being done. So one section of it I just wanted to look at, and I found myself getting moved, and I thought, well, this is odd. I know what's coming up. This is not a surprise. So yeah, it's changed me some. It's changed me some.
People do say it's a miracle when any picture turns out well, because the odds against it are definitely loaded. Dice. Odds against it are very high. In this instance, you know, I think we were all convinced while we were making it, this was something very special. Very special.
You know, we've had folk here that have come to see the movie who have been hardened lawyers or agents or and people that have walked out and said, I'm going home to read the Gospels. I want to know more about the story. An atheist saying, I need to buy a Bible. People that have lapsed in their faith being inspired to return to their faith.
What a great experience. I wouldn't change a moment in that film, as hard as it was. I'm a lucky guy to have been part of it.
Charles Spurgeon, who was a British theologian, who once said that the Word of God is like a lion. You don't need to defend it, just turn it loose. And in some respects, Mel Gibson turned a lion loose on February 25th, 2004. And it needed no defense. The film spoke for itself.
It did dig pretty deep on me. Not just the making of it and the post-production aspect of it, but what it did culturally was astounding to me.
I'm a different person now than I was a couple years ago from this film, from working on this movie. My family has completely changed. My friends that have worked on this film are different to different degrees. Everybody was touched. I was drastically touched.
It was about forgiving your enemies, and they understood that. And that kind of message, and that it could convey that to most people that saw it, is for me a raging success, and defeats division, separation, and brought many, many people together. And that was the idea. So it worked.